Welcome to Reformed Thinking. I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are sitting across a massive, polished mahogany desk from a really stern-looking hiring manager.
A very intimidating setup.
Right, super intimidating. And they slide this highly restrictive employment contract across the table toward you.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
You pick up the pen, but, before you sign, you start reading the terms and your eyes just go wide because the demands are absolute.
Like zero wiggle room.
None. There are no sick days. There is no vacation time. There are no exit clauses at all. If you sign this piece of paper, you belong to this company for the rest of your natural life.
Wow. Yeah, that's heavy.
Right. No matter how bad the working conditions get, no matter how much you might end up, I don't know, disliking your manager or your coworkers, you cannot leave.
You were locked in.
You're locked in.
Yeah.
So faced with a document like that, out of sheer unadulterated fear of those strict terms, you would probably slide the paper right back across the desk.
Oh, absolutely. I'd run.
Yeah, you would look for the nearest exit rather than considering the actual value of the job or the mission of the company. You just think, if those are the rules, it is far better for me not to sign at all.
That makes total sense from a human perspective.
It really does. And that instinctive fleshly reaction to a terrifyingly high standard is, well, it's the specific thing we're unpacking today. We're taking a deep dive into a theological analysis of Matthew chapter 19, verses 10 through 12.
A really heavy passage.
Very heavy. We have a stack of source texts that look at this passage through a Protestant Reformed lens, so adhering to the theology articulated in the Westminster Confession of Faith.
Right, which gives us a very specific framework for understanding God's sovereignty here.
Yes, that's our mission for today's deep dive. We want to unpack Christ's highly countercultural, kingdom-focused reality regarding marriage and singleness. Because, we live in a society that often treats singleness as either a playground for self-indulgence
Or a tragic waiting room.
yes, a waiting room where you just sit until real life begins. And at the same time, this culture treats marriage as a conditional contract. Like it has a built-in escape hatch the moment things get difficult.
Which is pretty much the opposite of the biblical view.
Right. Christ presents a reality that completely shatters both of those modern categories.
He really does.
Mhm.
The contrast between those modern categories and the biblical worldview is, it's massive. When we look at the pragmatic approach to relationships today, we see a society operating on this liberal, any-cause mentality.
Yeah.
If a relationship brings immediate emotional satisfaction, you stay. If it requires painful sacrifice, if it reveals your flaws, or, if it simply becomes difficult, you exercise your right to leave.
Because it's all about personal utility.
That's it. That is functional pragmatism.
Yeah.
It evaluates everything based on what I get out of it. But the text we are examining today brings you and I face to face with the Savior, who refuses to lower the bar to accommodate human weakness.
Doesn't budge.
He doesn't. Instead, he points to the holy providence of God. Whether a person is bound in the covenant of marriage or set apart in voluntary singleness, both states are grounded in the divine decree.
So it's not just about what we want in the moment.
Not at all. They are not products of our own fleeting whims, nor are they a reflection of our personal autonomy. We are dealing with God's sovereign distribution of grace.
I think we need to establish the exact historical scene to understand why this conversation even happened.
That's crucial, yeah. The context is everything.
Right. Because to grasp the disciples' reaction in verse 10, we have to look at the theological and political trap that was just laid for Jesus in the preceding verses.
The whole Pharisee encounter.
Yeah. Jesus is engaged in a dispute with the Pharisees. And the Pharisees at this time were divided into two main camps regarding marriage, the school of Shammai and the school of Hillel.
Right. Two very different schools of thought.
Very different. The school of Shammai was very strict. They said you could only divorce your wife for severe moral failure, like adultery.
Which was the minority view, honestly.
It was. But the school of Hillel was incredibly permissive. They taught that a man could divorce his wife for almost any cause at all.
Literally any cause.
Yeah, if she burned his dinner, or if he simply found another woman more attractive, he could write a certificate of divorce and dismiss her.
Which is horrifying when you think about it.
It really is. So the Pharisees approach Jesus and try to force him to take a side in this partisan debate. They ask, is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause?
You want to trap him.
Exactly. Spot on. They want to trap him. But Jesus completely bypasses their petty legal loopholes. He refuses to play their game.
He goes all the way back to the beginning.
He points all the way back to the Garden of Eden, right to the pre-fall creation mandate. He establishes marriage as an indissoluble one-flesh union created by the spoken word of God.
And that's a massive paradigm shift for them.
Right. He says, "What God has joined together, let not man separate." He frames marriage not as a flexible social contract that humans can renegotiate, but as a sacred obligation established by the Creator himself.
A permanent bond.
Yes. And when the disciples hear this absolute standard, they are completely shocked. Their immediate reaction in verse 10 is, "If such is the case of a man with his wife, it is better not to marry."
Which is such a blunt, honest reaction.
It is.
That reaction from the disciples is incredibly revealing about human psychology. The sources we're working from point out that the disciples have genuinely grasped the severity of what Jesus just taught.
You didn't miss the point.
No, they understand that Christ has definitively closed the door on casual covenant breaking. They realize that marriage, in the eyes of God, is solemn, permanent, and governed by divine authority rather than, human convenience.
But they don't exactly love that idea.
Not at all. Instead of bowing before the holiness of that institution, they recoil from it in terror. And this brings us to a core idea in Reformed thinking, which is the first use of the moral law.
Oh, this is a great concept to unpack.
We often talk about the law functioning like a mirror. When the law of God is proclaimed in its absolute unvarnished purity, it exposes human sin.
Like looking at your face first thing in the morning.
Right. It shows us our natural pollution and our total inability to meet God's standard in our own strength. When you look into a mirror, it can show you the dirt on your face, but the mirror itself has no ability to wash your face clean.
It just reveals the problem.
Right. The disciples are looking into the mirror of God's perfect design for marriage. They see their own selfish inadequacies reflected back at them, and they fall into this fleshly, pragmatic despair.
I want to push back on their motives for a second, because I can hear someone listening right now thinking, well, the disciples are just being logical.
Sure, from a human standpoint.
Going back to that employment contract analogy I used at the beginning, if you see the strictness of the terms and you know you are prone to making mistakes, your immediate thought is to look for an exit strategy.
You want a safety net.
Yeah. The disciples are thinking, if we cannot get out of this when it gets agonizingly hard, we just will not enter into it at all. So are the disciples simply being practical here? Or does this response expose a subtle underlying rebellion of the human heart against divine standards?
It's a great question.
Because it feels like they're saying, God's design is far too risky for my personal comfort, so I will pass.
It absolutely exposes a rebellion of the heart. And that is a crucial point to understand. Fallen humanity rarely denies God's command outright at the very beginning.
We usually try to negotiate.
Yes. Instead, the sinful heart seeks a workaround. When obedience appears difficult, we immediately begin calculating alternatives. Notice that the disciples do not argue in favor of easy divorce. They just decide that avoiding the institution of marriage altogether is the safer bet.
They just opt out.
Right. They're thinking entirely in terms of burden and restriction, not in terms of stewardship or holy vocation. This is the sin of pragmatism.
They want the perks without the cost.
Precisely. They desire the comforts of companionship. They want the benefit to the union, but they recoil at the cost of unconditional obligation. The reaction highlights a deeply human resistance to costly obedience.
Wow.
They lose sight of the goodness of the creation ordinance because they are so fixated on the difficulty of the standard. They would rather forfeit a beautiful gift than submit to the rules governing that gift.
You can see how this first century reaction mirrors so much of what we see in modern culture, especially within the church today.
Oh, heavily. It's everywhere.
Think about the seeker-sensitive movements, or just the general me-first attitude of society. There is this constant, intense pressure to lower the bar of God's commands to accommodate human frailty.
Make it easier to swallow.
Right. The logic is, if the standard is too high, people will be discouraged. They will leave the church. So let's make the terms a little easier. Let's not talk about the permanence of marriage. Let's just talk about personal fulfillment.
Which is a complete distortion.
It completely undermines the function of the law, right? If you use the law like an MRI machine, the MRI is supposed to show you the fatal tumor so that you will desperately seek the surgeon.
That's a great analogy.
The law is supposed to crush that self-reliance and drive sinners to grace. If you lower the bar to make people feel better, they never realize they need a savior to help them leap over it.
That is a staggering reality. The modern evangelical movement often falls into the exact same trap as the first century culture. We want a religion that guarantees personal ease.
We want a comfortable faith.
Yeah, we want a God who functions as a cosmic therapist, affirming our choices rather than demanding our holiness.
Yeah.
But Christ does not validate the disciples' anxiety here.
He doesn't say, oh, you're right, that's too hard.
He doesn't. He does not say, you know what, guys, you are right. That is a bit too strict. Let me soften the rules on divorce so you feel more comfortable. He maintains the holy standard to expose their absolute need for grace.
He lets the weight sit on them.
The human heart, left to its own devices, would rather abandon the institution of marriage entirely than submit to God's design. The disciples' despair is actually the beginning of wisdom, provided it leads them to realize they cannot fulfill the requirements of God without divine assistance.
Right. The friction is the point.
They're operating on the principle of what is in it for me, while Jesus is trying to point them toward the glory of God's design. The friction here is between human comfort and divine holiness.
So Jesus lets the immense weight of the law sit heavily on them. He does not rush to make them feel better about their inability, but he also does not leave them in absolute despair.
Right. He gives them a path forward.
He transitions the conversation from their human inability to divine sovereignty. In verse 11, he responds to their fearful statement that it is better not to marry. He says, not everyone can receive this saying, but only those to whom it is given.
A really fascinating pivot.
Yeah, the sources we are analyzing dive into the specific Greek words used in the sentence, and the nuance here is pretty incredible. Jesus uses the verb churish, which means making room for or containing.
Right.
And he uses what theologians call a divine passive, the word deidotai, which translates to is given. I want to break this down so we understand the gravity of it. What is the actual theological weight of these specific words?
The linguistic choices Christ makes here are vital for understanding the reformed view of human agency.
Okay, unpack that.
The verb tre implies an internal spiritual capacity to accept and live out a difficult truth. It is not just intellectual agreement. It is not simply nodding your head at a doctrine.
It's more active than that.
Very much so. It is the ability to embody specific calling, to literally make room in your life for a demanding vocation. When Christ says this capacity is deidotai, given, he is using the divine passive to indicate that God the Father is the sole active agent bestowing this gift.
Oh, wow. So God is doing the giving.
Exactly. This brings us directly to the concept of God's eternal decree. The capacity to embrace singleness for the sake of the kingdom is not generated by a stoic temperament. It is not produced by sheer human willpower or, an introverted personality.
That's not a personality type.
Not at all. It is a sovereignly bestowed gift ordained by God from all eternity. You do not manufacture the ability to live this out. You receive it from the hand of the King.
So it is not an accident. If someone listening right now is single, it is not because they missed their chance or because they are undesirable or because they just have not swiped right on the correct dating app.
No, it's highly intentional.
It is a specific assignment. I like to think of it like a king preparing an army for a massive multi-front campaign. The king issues specific, tailored uniforms and gear to different soldiers.
Right, depending on their role.
Yeah. Most soldiers receive the standard infantry gear, which we could compare to the ordinary pattern of marriage. It is a noble calling, it involves fighting alongside a unit, and it is the standard expectation.
The standard marching orders.
Right. But the king hands a few specific soldiers the specialized, lightweight gear of a lone scout. Getting that scout uniform is not a punishment for failing infantry school.
That's a great point. It's not a demotion.
No. It is not a sign that the king forgot to order enough standard uniforms. It is a highly specific, purposeful assignment for a unique mission that requires someone unhindered by the standard heavy gear.
That is a brilliant way to visualize the concept. The calling to remain unmarried is an exceptional grant of grace for a specific kingdom purpose. And our sources point out that this text serves as a massive polemic against several historical and theological errors that still infect the church today.
I'd love to hear about those errors. What are we looking at?
Well, first, it completely refutes Arminian ideas of free will dictating spiritual devotion.
Ah, okay.
Arminianism often suggests that we conjure up our own spiritual capacities through our own autonomous choices. But Christ says the ability to receive this calling is not based on human choice. It is the gift of the Father's decree.
So you can't just volunteer for the lone scout role.
Right. You cannot will yourself into the lone scout role if the king's not issued you that uniform. Second, this text dismantles the Roman Catholic error of mandatory clerical celibacy.
Oh, that's a huge one, historic.
Massive. During the Middle Ages, the church began forcing a universal ecclesiastical rule out of a selective sovereign gift.
They made it a requirement for everyone in ministry.
Right. By stating that only those to whom it is given can receive this calling, Christ shows the disaster of mandating celibacy for all priests. Binding the conscience of every minister to a state that God only grants to some goes directly against the teachings of Christ here.
Which causes huge problems.
And history shows the tragic moral failures that result from forcing a calling that God has not decreed.
That is a massive historical caution. You cannot mandate a calling that God has not sovereignly bestowed. If you try to force the Lone Scout uniform onto someone who was given the infantry assignment, you are going to end up with a soldier who collapses under the wrong conditions.
They'll buckle under the weight.
Exactly. But I want to ask a challenging question regarding human autonomy here. Let me play devil's advocate for the modern listener.
Sure, go for it.
We live in a culture that is absolutely obsessed with self-determination. The highest cultural virtue today is crafting your own identity, choosing your own path, and writing your own story.
You do you.
Right, you do you. In that kind of environment, how do you accept that your relational status, whether you are married or single, is an assignment handed down by divine wisdom rather than a lifestyle you construct yourself? Doesn't that make people feel like they are just robots acting out a script?
That tension is the central friction between the biblical worldview and modern culture. Contemporary society treats life as a project of self-construction. You are supposedly the author of your own destiny.
We really love that idea.
We do. But the Christian disciple must begin with submission, not self-expression. We receive our calling from God just as we receive our salvation from Him with empty hands.
See, it's about trust.
Yes. Acknowledging God's sovereignty does not make you a robot. It makes you a beloved subject of a perfectly wise king. This reality directly confronts movements like the prosperity gospel, which often treats singleness as a curse or a lack of faith.
Like it's a disease to be cured.
Exactly. The prosperity gospel says, if you just pray hard enough, if you believe enough, if you declare it over your life, God will give you a spouse. That theology turns a sovereign decree into a cosmic vending machine.
Put in enough faith, get out a spouse.
Right. Treating relational status as a divine decree alters pastoral care entirely. It means we stop trying to fix singleness as if it were a disease to be cured, and we start honoring it as a holy vocation distributed by the King for His glory.
So having established that this capacity is a sovereign decree, a gift given by God, the text logically shifts to the practical categories in which this decree is actually experienced in a fallen world.
It gets very practical very quickly.
It does. Jesus does not just leave this as an abstract theological concept hovering in the clouds. He grounds it in the dirt and pain of real human life.
He deals with reality.
In verse 12, he breaks down 3 specific categories of eunuchs. He says, "For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven."
3 very distinct situations.
Let's break these down, starting with the first 2. How do these relate to the harsh realities of a fallen world?
The first 2 categories highlight the intense realism and pastoral tenderness of Christ. When he speaks of those who are eunuchs from birth, he is acknowledging that not all people enter life with the same physical constitution or natural inclination for marriage.
You're right. It's just a reality of how some people are born.
He is pointing to the doctrine of providence. In a fallen world, physical realities differ. Congenital realities exist. God's providence encompasses all of these variations.
Okay, and the second category?
Then, when he speaks of those made eunuchs by men, he is addressing the dark, violent reality of human cruelty. Yeah, in the ancient world, physical emasculation was often forced upon men who served in royal courts to ensure they would not pose a threat to the king's harem or try to establish their own dynasty.
So it was a political maneuver.
It was. Jesus acknowledges that some lives are marked by severe suffering and the sinful, destructive actions of others, which deprive them of the ordinary blessings of family.
He doesn't look away from that trauma.
He doesn't dismiss these painful providences at all. He looks directly at the trauma and includes these marginalized individuals in his redemptive horizon.
It is genuinely amazing how Jesus addresses the brokenness of the world head-on. He knows that human society leaves massive scars. He sees the people who have been sidelined by birth or by trauma.
He sees them and validates their place.
But then he introduces the third category, which our sources identify as the climax of the passage. He talks about those who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven.
This is the massive shift.
This has to be a huge cultural shock to his original listeners. In the ancient Near East, the term you mentioned, eunuchos, carried heavy stigma.
Very heavy stigma.
It meant physical alteration, often violent and humiliating, to serve a pagan earthly king. Jesus takes this loaded, marginalized term and completely repurposes it. He claims it for a spiritual, voluntary devotion to the King of Kings.
Yes, the language shifts entirely from physical circumstance to spiritual vocation. And we must be crystal clear here, as all our sources insist. Jesus is not commending literal physical mutilation.
Right. Nobody should take a knife to this text.
Definitely not. That was a brutal heresy that plagued some parts of the early church. The theologian Origen famously took this passage literally, to his own detriment.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That kind of asceticism contradicts the broader biblical view of the goodness of the human body and God's physical creation. The meaning here is metaphorical.
It's about spiritual focus.
Right. It describes a voluntary spiritual redirection of the affections. This is an example of what Reformed theology calls the third use of the moral law. The believer, empowered by grace, chooses a path of grateful obedience that allows for undivided labor for the kingdom.
It's a choice made out of devotion, not disgust.
Exactly. The motive is not a disdain for marriage, but a purposeful, Christ-centered devotion that supersedes earthly desires.
I think we need to pause and highlight the massive danger of Gnosticism here.
Very necessary, yeah.
Gnosticism was an ancient heresy, but it still infects the church today. It essentially teaches that the physical body and the material world are inherently evil, and only the invisible spiritual realm is good.
Which is a very common trap.
Someone listening might think, okay, if I give up sex and marriage, I am more spiritual because I am denying my dirty physical body. How do we draw a firm, immovable line between honoring this voluntary singleness for the kingdom and falling into the trap of hating the physical body or viewing earthly blessings as inherently bad?
That distinction is paramount for a healthy Christian life. A Gnostic or ascetic view renounces marriage because it views the physical union as dirty, unspiritual, or beneath the dignity of a holy person.
Like they're too pure for it.
Right. But the biblical view renounces marriage because the kingdom of heaven is of such surpassing value that even a genuinely good, beautiful earthly gift can be laid aside for its sake.
Oh, that's a brilliant way to frame it. The motive changes everything.
The motive makes all the difference in the world. Sacrifice severed from God's purpose is just empty, bitter loss. But when a lawful blessing is set aside for the advancement of the kingdom, it becomes an act of holy consecration.
You sacrifice something valuable.
Right. You do not sacrifice trash on an altar, you sacrifice the unblemished lamb. The person choosing singleness is not saying, marriage is bad, so I will avoid it. They're saying, marriage is a wonderful gift from the Creator, but Christ has called me to a different form of obedience for His glory, and He is worth the cost.
So, what does this actually look like for the listener? What does it mean for modern singleness? We often see singleness treated as a waiting room.
Yeah, that's the default assumption.
You sit there, flipping through old magazines, just killing time until your name gets called and you finally get to enter the real life of marriage. You are told your life has not truly begun yet.
Which is incredibly damaging.
But this text describes singleness as a frontline commission. It is not the absence of a normal life. It is a highly specialized, active deployment. You are not waiting for life to start. You are already in the field, carrying out a vital mission that married people simply do not have the logistical freedom to accomplish.
That waiting room mentality is a massive failure of modern church culture. When singleness is viewed that way, it breeds deep resentment and a crushing sense of being providentially forgotten by God.
Like God lost your file.
Right. But Jesus dignifies singleness here. He gives it supreme, immediate purpose. The unmarried believer has unusual freedom for ministry, hospitality, intense study, and rapid kingdom labor because they are unbound by the ordinary God-ordained domestic obligations of family life.
Paul mentions this too, doesn't he?
He talks about this extensively in 1 Corinthians 7. However, this intense focus on the honor of voluntary singleness naturally raises a critical question about the value of marriage itself.
It creates a bit of a seesaw effect.
Yeah, we have to maintain a very careful theological balance here so we do not swing the pendulum too far in the other direction and accidentally insult God's design.
Right. If Jesus is praising those who give up marriage for the kingdom, someone might listen to this and think, okay, so marriage is sort of a second-class spirituality. It is the plan B for the people who just could not handle the extreme devotion of singleness. It is for the spiritually weak.
That's a very easy conclusion to jump to.
But the sources offer a very strict warning against that exact line of thinking. Jesus' teaching on singleness does not diminish the goodness of marriage one bit.
Not at all.
Marriage remains a pre-fall creation mandate. It is a divine ordinance instituted before sin ever entered the world. It is the ordinary, expected pattern for human life.
The sources outline two major historical errors the church must diligently avoid. The first error is denigrating marriage, treating family life as an inferior tier of godliness.
We gotta do that.
We must call to mind that Jesus initiated this entire conversation by vigorously defending the sanctity of marriage against the Pharisees' casual view.
He went to bat for it.
He did. He traced it back to creation. He elevated it as a reflection of God's own character. So, his subsequent teaching on singleness cannot possibly be read as a retreat from that high view of marriage.
It's a boat hand situation.
Right. The exception, singleness for the kingdom, only makes sense because the goodness of marriage remains firmly intact. If marriage was not a supreme earthly good, giving it up would not be a notable sacrifice.
I look at it like this. Imagine you inherit a beautiful, historic family mansion. It has been in your family for generations.
Okay, I like mansions.
It is gorgeous, it is valuable, and it is a genuinely wonderful place to live and raise children. Now, if you decide to leave that mansion to take a specialized, dangerous overseas mission in a remote jungle, your departure does not mean the house is suddenly a bad place.
It doesn't devalue the house.
Right. It does not mean the house is rotting or evil. It simply means that your new mission takes absolute precedence over enjoying the legitimate comforts of that home. Renouncing a gift only means something if the gift is genuinely good in the first place. You do not get a medal for giving up something you hated anyway.
That analogy captures the concept perfectly. The kingdom of heaven relativizes all earthly institutions.
It puts them in perspective.
Marriage is a tremendous good, but it is not absolute. Family is a tremendous good, but it is not absolute. Only Christ's reign is absolute. Which brings us to the second historical error the church must avoid, absolutizing marriage.
Making it the ultimate goal.
Right. This is the false notion that full Christian maturity, adult completion, or true spiritual fulfillment can only be found in the marital union. Jesus rejects that completely.
You don't need a ring to be mature.
A person is not spiritually incomplete just because they are unmarried. Their fulfillment is found in receiving God's calling, whatever shape that takes.
We really need to talk about the second error because I think it is the far more common one in our current cultural moment. Over the last few decades, we have built up this massive idol of the nuclear family.
It's the idol of the American dream, practically.
Yes. Have modern churches created a functional Arminianism where the family is treated as the center of the universe and single believers are left feeling totally alienated?
Sadly, yes.
I hear from single friends all the time who feel like they are treated as youth group kids who just have not graduated to the adult church yet, simply because they do not have a spouse and a minivan.
It's a very common complaint.
They feel like they are viewed as projects to be matched up, rather than vital organs in the body of Christ.
It is a systemic, painful issue in many congregations. When a church idolizes the nuclear family, it places an unbearable, crushing weight on an earthly institution.
A weight it wasn't designed to carry.
Right. It tells people, implicitly or explicitly, that their ultimate value, stability, and spiritual maturity are tied to their marital status.
Yeah.
This is a functional Arminianism because it relies on human effort, finding a spouse, maintaining a perfect home, to achieve a status that guarantees belonging.
Instead of just resting in grace.
Exactly. Rather than resting in the sovereign grace that unites all believers to Christ regardless of their earthly status, we have to dismantle this idol. We must cultivate a biblical culture where both states, the covenant of marriage and devoted singleness, are honored as specific, equally valid callings under God.
So let me ask you, how does a congregation actively dismantle this idol of the nuclear family, while at the same time upholding the intense biblical strictness of the marriage covenant that Jesus laid out just a few verses earlier?
It requires a lot of intentionality.
Because we do not want to tear down the family. We just want to put it in its proper place on the mantle rather than on the altar where only God belongs. How does a pastor thread that needle?
The solution is rigorous, kingdom-focused discipleship. A church must teach its people to view all of life through the lens of eternity.
Looking past the present moment.
Pastors must boldly preach the high demands of the marriage: covenant, fidelity, patience, steadfast love, and the absolute rejection of easy divorce, while simultaneously preaching that marriage belongs strictly to this present age.
It won't last forever.
It is temporary. It points to a greater reality. At the same time, the church must integrate single believers fully into the life of the body. They should not be relegated to the margins or grouped only with other singles as if they are a separate species that needs to be quarantined.
Like the singles ministry silo.
Right. The church is a spiritual family where biological and marital ties are secondary to the blood of Christ. When both groups recognize that their ultimate identity is secured in Jesus, the idolatry begins to crumble.
That transition from doctrine to the pew is essential. We have to look at the ultimate example of this teaching and how it applies to the varied lives of the people listening right now.
We have to look at Christ himself.
In the second half of verse 12, Jesus issues a final exhortation. He who is able to receive this, let him receive it. The sources focus heavily on this final phrase. They connect this statement to Christ himself as the ultimate fulfillment of this calling. He is the ultimate eunuch for the kingdom.
This is where the theology becomes breathtakingly beautiful. Jesus did not just issue abstract commands from a safe distance. He lived this reality perfectly.
He walked the walk.
He did. For the joy set before him, the joy of purchasing his spiritual bride, the church. He forsook the comforts of an earthly home. He forewent an earthly bride and physical descendants.
He laid all of that down.
He devoted himself with a singular, burning focus to the Father's business. On the cross, he experienced ultimate, agonizing isolation so that we might experience eternal union with God. Therefore, the strength to obey these callings, whether enduring the severe trials of marriage or the intense loneliness of singleness, does not come from human grit. It comes from being united to the crucified and risen Lord.
Union with Christ. That is the engine that drives all of this. It is not a self-help strategy where you just try harder to be a good spouse or a content single person.
It's about drawing from his strength.
Now, the sources break down the application of this text into 3 specific groups, and I want to walk through each of them because this text acts as a mirror for everyone listening. Let's start with unbelievers. How does this passage challenge someone who does not submit to Christ's lordship?
For the unbeliever, this text exposes a foundational rebellion against God's design. The law functions here to reveal the pollution of the natural heart.
It shines a bright light on the rebellion.
If an unbeliever views marriage casually, demanding easy exits when things get tough, treating vows like temporary suggestions, they are actively resisting the Creator's holy ordinance.
They're fighting God's design.
Conversely, if they use singleness merely as a shield for sexual autonomy, avoiding commitment so they can pursue selfish independence, they are mocking the holy purpose of the body.
The text calls them out either way.
The text leaves absolutely no room for human autonomy. It calls the unbeliever to recognize their guilt before a holy God and flee to Christ in repentance, seeking the grace they so desperately lack.
Okay, now let's turn to single saints. The believers who are currently unmarried, whether by choice, by circumstance, or by tragedy. The call here is to reject the idols of romanticism,
Which are everywhere in our culture.
We live in a world pumped full of rom-coms and pop songs telling you that you're only half a person until you find your soulmate. But this text says singleness is a charisma, a sovereignly bestowed gift.
A gift, not a curse.
It is meant for undivided kingdom labor, and it is meant to be grounded in the local church, not lived in isolation.
Single believers are called to radical contentment and purposeful devotion. This passage frees them from the crushing, suffocating burden of worldly expectations.
They can breathe.
They do not have to view their lives as a tragic waiting period. Their current status is a direct assignment from the King. They are called to utilize their unique freedom for the edification of the saints.
They have a specific role to play.
They offer a vital theological witness to the whole congregation. Their life demonstrates visibly that Christ is sufficient, that the kingdom is infinitely more valuable than earthly companionship, and that our ultimate hope is not in a human spouse, but in the returning groom.
That is a staggering witness to the world. It proves that Jesus is actually enough. And finally, we have to apply this to the married saints.
The text has heavy implications for them, too.
It calls them to reject the consumer mentality that infects so many modern marriages. The idea that I will stay as long as my needs are met, and the moment I am unhappy, I am out.
That's the pragmatism we talked about earlier.
No, the text calls married believers to endure difficulties. It frames the trials of marriage as a forge for sanctification. And crucially, it calls them to support their single brothers and sisters.
Married believers must look at the covenant they made and realize it is a theater for displaying the gospel.
A visible representation.
They are called to display unconditional love, forgiveness, and steadfastness, even when it is agonizingly difficult and requires massive self-denial. Furthermore, they must recognize that their marriage is a temporary institution.
Ends at death.
It will not exist in the new heavens and the new earth. Therefore, they must open their homes and their lives to single believers, integrating them into the daily fabric of their family life.
Breaking down those walls.
This mutual support is what makes the local church a true, functioning spiritual household rather than a collection of isolated nuclear families.
I want you to think about the local church as the eternal family table. In a lot of cultures, the family dinner table is an exclusive club.
Invitation only.
You have to share a last name or share DNA to get a seat at that table. But the church table is completely different. Biological ties, marital status, those things are superseded by the blood of Christ.
They pale in comparison.
At that table, the single believer and the married believer sit as equals, as siblings adopted by the same father. I want to ask you, the listener, to evaluate this in your own life. Where do you find your primary identity? Is it in your marital status, your fierce independence, or is it in your seat at that eternal table?
The visible demonstration of this unity is found in the administration of the Lord's Supper. When the church gathers at the communion table, it is the visible word of the gospel.
It's all played out right there.
At that table, the trivial distinctions of this world fade entirely into the background. Whether you arrived at church with a spouse and 4 children, or you arrived completely alone, you come to the table as part of one unified body.
You're all eating the same meal.
You eat the same bread and drink the same cup. The church is one bride, waiting for the return of the one true groom. The supper points us away from our earthly relational statuses and fixes our gaze on our eternal union with Christ.
That is where the power to obey comes from.
That is where we draw the grace to fulfill whatever calling God has sovereignly assigned to us.
So, what does this all mean for us today? Let's bring these threads of divine decree, kingdom devotion, and practical obedience together. We have covered a massive amount of theological ground.
A lot of heavy lifting today.
Whether you are called to the covenant of marriage with all its heavy obligations and beautiful joys, or you are called to kingdom-oriented singleness with its unique sacrifices and unparalleled freedoms, both paths require something that we do not naturally possess.
We can't do it on our own.
They both require reverent obedience, and they both require utter, desperate dependence on God's grace. You cannot succeed in either state relying on your own fleshly willpower.
The central thrust of the passage is unmistakable. Christ is Lord over every aspect of our lives, including the specific forms our lives take.
He calls the shots.
He defends the sanctity of marriage against human hardness of heart, and he dignifies singleness as a holy vocation. He leaves us no room for selfish pragmatism or self-protective calculation.
We can't negotiate the terms.
We are called to hold all our earthly blessings with open hands, submitting our desires to the supreme claims of the kingdom of heaven. Our faithful response is simply to receive what the Father has given and to labor for his glory in whatever station we find ourselves.
We started this deep dive by talking about that restrictive employment contract and how our fleshly instinct is to run away from high standards and seek an easy exit.
We want to find the loophole.
We want autonomy. We want control over the pen that writes our story. But Christ offers us a kingdom that requires full surrender. I want to leave you with a challenging concept to mull over.
The diagnostic question.
What if the way you view your current relationship status, whether you are deeply frustrated in your singleness or you are resentful of the strict bounds of your marriage, what if that reaction is actually the most accurate diagnostic test of your functional theology regarding God's sovereignty?
That's a piercing question to end on.
Does your response to your situation reveal a heart that trusts the king's tailored assignments? Or does it reveal a heart that is still fighting for control of the pen? Thank you for joining this deep dive into the source material.